Welcome to Taking Care of Business on News Talk 1180 KERN for the best in Saturday Talk Radio at 1 o'clock and on 1230 KGEO at 10 o'clock Saturday, and for the best in Wednesday Talk Radio on 1410 KERI, the Christian station. We're now on 1000 KKIM in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And also now we're on the internet on knookmedium.com, serving Richmond, Oakland, and the San Francisco Bay Area. Your host is Clay Kerner, and I'm Marty Pay, and our producer is Greg Held. And Clay is doing what he loves to do best. He's giving a talk on Obamacare today as we speak, so it'll just be Greg and I in the studio. And I wanted to thank our guest last week. We had a lot of fun with Nancy Phillips from Virtual Enterprise. I highly recommend that program. If you want to see the youth, the high school, the best of the high school students that we have, get involved in Virtual Enterprise. It's a fantastic program. And today I'm looking forward to a great show. In the second half, we have Wayne Root, former VP Libertarian candidate, talking about Obamacare. But in the first half of the show, we have somebody very special I've been really looking forward to talking to. A gentleman who at one time, many moons ago, was my congressman. Former congressman and businessman, a name we all know, Barry Goldwater, Jr. Congressman, welcome to Taking Care of Business.
Hey, Marty, it's always nice to talk to you. You have a great reputation for ideas and for discussion.
Well, thank you, Barry. I really appreciate that. So you were my congressman way back when.
Well, I was. And if you lived out in the valley, I was your congressman at San Fernando Valley, north of Los Angeles.
Yes, I was. You were. Let's see. You were in Congress from 1979 to 1993, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I was. Yep. I went to high school there. I was in the Marines in the early 70s, but I lived there until about 81, and then I moved to Thousand Oaks. But yeah, so you were my congressman for a couple of years there. My parents still live in your old district there. So
it's a terrific area of California, and Burbank was probably the most prominent city where all of the studios, NBC, CBS, Walt Disney, Warner Brothers, all the studios are located.
Yeah, and you and I were talking off the air, a Bob Hope story we were sharing, and then John Wayne. You said Bob Hope and then John Wayne were chairman of your campaign at one time.
Well, I lived in the Toluca Lake area, and Bob Hope lived right around the corner, and so and I knew the gentleman well anyway, and he became my first chairman of my campaign when I ran in a special election in 1969. And then the second time I ran, John Wayne was my chairman.
Wow.
But I represented a lot of the motion picture industry, so I know those people well.
Oh, yeah, in that area there in Burbank, Toluca Lake, and, like you say, that's where all the studios were, Universal Studios, so it's a pretty prominent area, especially at that time.
Yeah.
Well, before you and I get into some current topics, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about your dad that just kind of ran through my mind as I was coming down the hill this morning. I remember, well, let's see, I was born in 1950, so I wasn't obviously old enough to vote, but I remember that campaign that your dad ran against President Johnson. One thing I've always wondered is, what would your dad have done? President Johnson got us involved in Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin was kind of a sham, and what was the Secretary of Defense's name?
That wasn't Laird, was it?
No, not McCormick.
Oh, you're talking about the Ford Motor Company executive.
Yes. God, all of a sudden I drew a blank.
Yeah.
But he wrote a book not too long ago before he passed away called In Retrospect, looking back, McNamara. Looking back, saying that
Secretary McNamara,
yep,
Secretary of Defense.
Yep, saying that we wouldn't have done it in retrospect. What would your dad have done? Because that was part of the campaign thing. Is that Johnson was saying that he was going to keep us out of Vietnam, yet he got us involved.
Well, of course, the Vietnam War started under Eisenhower, and then JFK increased the Americans' presence, and then of course Johnson accelerated it greatly. I'm only guessing, but my father detested war. He thought that humanity killing each other was silly and stupid. He would have made every effort to gotten us out of there. But he also, in saying that, he was one that believed that if you're going to go to war, you go there to win. So he more than likely would have pulled out all the stops and tried to win that war as a way of extracting Americans. But he would have inherited something that had already been started, and how you extract yourself may have been an impossibility because of the will of those people in their own country fighting for their own life. That's hard to match.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We're having a conversation with former Congressman Barry Goldwater, Jr. Barry, another question I had, I remember watching your dad on, I want to say, Johnny Carson's program, and he was talking about, they were talking about the break-in early on and Watergate. And he was talking about, I guess he was a little bit of an electronics buff, and he was talking about the fact that, everybody was bugging, they had all kinds of electronics going on, and Kennedy was doing it for, a couple years beforehand. Mm-hmm. Do you think Nixon just kind of died because he didn't have any kind of backing from anybody? And the fact that he lied about it, because the electronics end of it, as far as the bugging, everybody was doing it.
Well, that's true, and that's true even today. Part of what is done in campaigns is to find out what your opponents are doing. Now, some campaigns become a little more, exciting and maybe cross the line, and I think that was the case here with Watergate. And I think Nixon left office because he didn't own up to it. He didn't tell the truth. And I think it's that pure and simple. If he just said, "Hey, it happened. We apologize. It won't happen again." People like to be told and talked to honestly, and I think Nixon avoided that, and I think that was his downfall.
Yeah, it was interesting because I remember your dad talking about the electronics end of it, and I never thought of it from that angle. And then anything you read about Kennedy, they really talk about the fact that he was doing it for a long time. And I think Eisenhower, I remember reading someplace that Eisenhower started to do it, electronics at that age was a little bit in its infancy stage, but he was doing the same type of thing, 10 years before Watergate happened, or 20 years before Watergate.
Yeah, spying on your opponents is pretty standard in any campaign. You just got to be careful that you don't get caught, right?
Exactly.
And Nixon got caught. If he owned up to it, it would have gone away in an eyelash.
Yeah, I think so. I have one more question on the past for you. It's funny, I've been doing a lot of reading about Kennedy with the 50th anniversary of the assassination.
Right.
And the more I read about Kennedy, the more I see how conservative he was based on our definition of conservative and liberal today. He was conservative physically. Yeah. He was conservative when it came to national defense. Do you see Kennedy that way?
Yes. John F. Kennedy was one that initiated cutting taxes to increase economic activity. And I think he's the one that coined it lifts all boats. But yeah, Kennedy was conservative when it comes to money and taxes. He was probably socially more liberal than, say, my father, mm-hmm. but in a different way. My father believed in a safety net, that we have an obligation to help our poor, our elderly, and those who are disadvantaged, but we help them not to perpetuate the assistance, but to help them get out of it and get back into a productive mode. The liberals, John F. Kennedy and Johnson and others, they feel that the buck stops at the federal government. The federal government should create all these safety nets and basically have a program that perpetuates itself from one generation to the next. Conservative who believes in the safety net, but we like to make it more localized, run by the states, encourage and bring into the process charities, the churches, and other people that want to help out also, that it's just not a government responsibility. So, yeah, Kennedy was pretty conservative, and he believed in a strong military.
And it's interesting when you look at our founding fathers. Nowhere in there did they intend for the government to take the role it's taking now. The role of the church, the role of organizations in society was to hold the state moral accountable and to take care of these things that now the state's taking over.
Well, and just one aside on Kennedy and my father, Senator Goldwater, they were very good friends, even though they were on opposite sides of the aisle. My father used to go down to the White House and sit in Kennedy's rocking chair and sipped bourbon with him. And they talked about running against each other in 1964, and they planned to do that. They were going to get one airplane, and they would together hopscotch around the country and debate each other, much like the Lincoln-Douglas debates.
Wow!
And that was all planned out, and they were ready to make that happen when he was assassinated.
Wow, that would have been interesting. Well, when we come back from the break, let's talk about current events.
Okay.
We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio News Talk 1180.